Last March, the Legislative Auditor's Report called Minnesota's teacher licensure system broken. Minnesota is also experiencing a teacher shortage. Senator Greg Clausen was a member of the bipartisan study group on educator licensure that met throughout the summer and a longtime school administrator. He now joins me in the studio. Welcome.
Thank you. Pleasure to be here.
One of the items pointed out by the Legislative Auditor's Report was that teacher licensure has been reporting to both the Board of Teaching and the Department of Education, which has created a lot of confusion. Which department do you think would best handle the situation?
Well, the governance issue is one of the main controversial points in the whole teacher licensing program in Minnesota. We found there were a lot of problems of having two entities involved in the process. I think if you look at other licensing boards in the state of Minnesota, many of them have people that are in the profession, and so having a board of teaching, I think, is preferable over having a department taking over that role. So I would support having it remain in some form with a board of people that comprised of teaching and active in the profession.
Will this be an item of controversy? Who is in charge?
You know, it is to some degree. In conversations I've had, I think the House is more agreeable to have a board of teaching, whereas there are members of the Senate that feel like the department should take over that role.
Would you explain how the proposed tier system would work? I understand there's going to be a change in levels of licensure, so some people could start, with the first tier with maybe minimal requirements, and then you move up. What's the thinking behind that, and how might that work?
Yeah, this is, again, this is in process, so I can give you my version of it, what I'd like to see. I'd like to see a six-tiered process. The first tier being helping districts that have emergency situations. We do have a teacher shortage in Minnesota, and so often it's difficult to find a teacher, especially in special education areas, mathematics, sciences, and so on. So I think we have to have an emergency tier where we allow teachers or people that are in the industry that have a bachelor's degree, people that are career technical education certified to come into our schools and teach on a temporary basis. But I don't think that we should allow that to be an ongoing process. I think I'd like to see it limited to 2 years. The second tier would be for people that perhaps started in tier 1 and want to really continue that and work towards getting a teacher license. This would also be people in tier 2 and grow your own programs. In Minneapolis-St. Paul area, people that are paraprofessionals, they're encouraged to get a teaching license. They've had experience in the schools. They're enrolled in the teacher preparation program. Tier 3 would be for your traditional four-year graduates that are coming out. They would apply for a 3-year license, and it's renewable upon 3 years, so they're going through a period where they are going to be supervised by peers, administrators, and so on. The fourth tier would be an area for the portfolio, where you could become certified through a portfolio process, or again, you'd be renewing a license after that 3rd year and moving on. And then the fourth year I should say too, would be a 5-year license, so a renewable traditional that we have in Minnesota. And then the 5th tier I would say would be for the master teacher. These are nationally board certified teachers that have gone through a rigorous training and vetting process. They have a national certificate. It also would be for our teachers that have the concurrent enrollment endorsement on their license, and they have met Higher Learning Commission standards and certification. Would also be for people that are International Baccalaureate certified teachers. So these are people that are a step above. And then the last one would be for our retired teachers to continue substitute teaching. They would have to have taught 10 years in Minnesota. They were in good standing at the time of their retirement, and they certainly would serve a purpose in our Minnesota schools as experienced teachers coming back on a temporary substitute basis.
So when I hear tiers, in my mind I think of sort of climbing a ladder, but this isn't really climbing a ladder, it's just sort of which slot you fit into based on your experience. Mm-hmm. So is salary tied at all to any of these tiers?
Well, salary is really dictated by the local school boards through the negotiation process. So I think that would really depend upon them. I would hope that, and they have to a certain degree, recognized that fifth tier, those teachers that have received national board certification. These are people that are very specialized, highly trained. They've gone through additional training. And I know that most school boards recognize and have a salary increment for those people that are nationally board certified. So I would assume that would occur in most school districts.
What is the future of licensure by portfolio? It was a law that was passed in 2008, and then it was recently discontinued. Is it currently under review? Because you mentioned it in the tier system.
Yes. I think it's very important, and I authored a bill back in 2015 to reinstate it. It's an important option for people to become certified. And there's certainly people that have the skills, the desire, and I think that they should be able to demonstrate through experience and education so that they could be certified teachers.
You know, I think sometimes there's a romanticized view of teaching. Teachers are passionate about sharing their knowledge and they're passionate about their subject matter. But, and that's true, but there's also some real work involved, and the teacher burnout level is high, and we're facing this teacher shortage. What thoughts do you have on how we can help teachers not get burned out?
Yeah. Well, that's a real good question. I think one of the things, especially in special education, is the paperwork that's connected with that. And I know that the legislature has looked at that and continues to look at that. How can we reduce the amount of paperwork that's involved? And then I think empowering teachers too, to make decisions at the local level, in their schools, at site councils, be part of the decision-making process, I think is very critical as well.
Senator Clausen, I want to thank you so much for your time today.
Thank you.